This is Archibald MacLeish opening a series of broadcasts called The American Story, a part of the NBC Inter-American University of the Air. The purpose of this series is to bring together from the ancient chronicles, the narratives, the letters, from the pages written by those who saw with their own eyes and were part of it, the American record, the record common to all of us who are American of whatever American country and whatever tongue. For many centuries now, we've been told of our difference from each other because our tongues are different, and because our ancestors came from different parts of the Eastern Hemisphere, and because we differ in look and in custom, some of us. These differences are real and important. They have value. But what is it that binds men together even more than common blood and common speech? Is it not a common experience of the earth, an experience common to them but not to others? And have we remembered in the Americas that we share in common an experience no other men, living or dead, have known? That this experience is, indeed, our history. We share in common, all of us who are Americans, the experience of the cabin of the little ship, where in the last dark before the dawn of Friday, the 12th day of October, in the year 1492, a man sat writing by a candle at a board.
The land was first seen by a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana. At 2 hours after midnight, the land was sighted at a distance of 2 leagues.
These are the words Columbus wrote in his cabin on the warm October night when the ship lay hove to in the trade wind off that unknown beach, the square sails slapping at the heavy stays, the lift and slide of the water on the hull, the heels overhead on the planks, the thankful voices. Throughout his voyage, the discoverer wrote in his journal, describing, as he tells us, each night what passed in the day, and each day how I navigated at night. The narrative he wrote is still, for those who can put themselves in imagination in Columbus' ship, a wonderful and moving story. The greatest narrative, perhaps, a man has ever written. The words are the simple, matter-of-fact words of the official record. But they will not deceive those who can imagine for themselves what the westward ocean was to men who were not certain that it had another shore, or what that shore would be, or how, if ever, they would return from it.
But the admiral at 10 the previous night, being on the castle of the poop, saw a light, though it was so uncertain he could not affirm it was land. It was like a wax candle rising and falling, as if people on shore were passing it from one hand to another.
The admiral, of course, was Columbus. It was by this title he demanded that his contemporaries should address him. And to posterity, in all the Spanish countries, he is the admiral still. But who then was the Admiral Columbus? Of what nation? Genoese because he was born there? Spanish because he sailed in Spanish ships? Dominican because he was buried in the city of that name? Or American, of every American nation equally? There were many discoverers of many tongues, but of one fame, that they found a shore of this continent, one shore or another. There were the English ships on the north coast, sliding in through the fog past the unseen islands, the water dripping from the heavy sails, the creak of the gear as the seas lifted.
A man can be wrong in the fog, but I heard it. When the wind stirred from the starboard, I heard, or the blood in my ears it might be, but I heard surf, or a sound like surf. What the surf would sound like in a Christian country. It is surf. It's the shore. There's land there. Land! Land, ho! Land to the starboard! Land, ho!
There were the Spanish ships with the trades behind them, the islands looming like the trade wind clouds. The Portuguese ships on the Patagonian coast in the winter landfall.
Terra! Terra!
The Dutch off the east capes with the low dunes and the oak trees.
Land in sight! Land! Land!
The sight of the land was called out on these coasts in many languages. There were Frenchmen, Dutchmen, Englishmen, Portuguese, Swedes, Spaniards, Norwegians. There were many records in many tongues, but to us, Americans, they are all one record and our own. What Rodrigo de Triana thought who first, as the Admiral tells us, sighted land, we do not know, though we know what he saw. We know how the moon, that night in its third quarter, and still astern in the eastern sky at 2 hours after midnight, we know how the moon would strike the white beach of that island the Indians call Guanahani. But if Rodrigo de Triana has left us nothing, not even his cry of tierra, tierra from the masthead of his ship, the Admiral is not so silent.
I left the city of Granada on the 12th day of May, in the same year of 1492, being Saturday, and came to the town of Palos, which is a seaport where I equipped 3 vessels well suited for such service, and departed from that port, well supplied with provisions and with many sailors, on the 3rd day of August of the same year, being Friday, half an hour before sunrise.
Each day what had passed in the night, and each night how he navigated by day. So, day after day and night after night, the Admiral wrote in his cabin in the slow, continuing sound of the caravels in the great sea, the swell lifting and following after and falling, the trace of the wake dissolving on the water as the Admiral watched it from his cabin port over the high stern.
Taking the route to the islands of Canaria, belonging to your Highness, which are in the said ocean sea, that I might thence take my departure for navigating until I should arrive at the Indies, and give the letter of your Highness to those princes, so as to comply.
It was on Thursday, the 9th of August, that the Admiral, as part of his duty, as he says, to write an account of all the voyage very punctually, entered in his book the Canary landfall.
Saw a great fire issue from the mountain on the island of Tenerife, which is of great height. Many honorable Spanish gentlemen, who were native of the island of Hierro, declared that every year they saw land to the west of the Canaries. This day made 19 leagues and arranged to reckon less than the number run, because if the voyage was of long duration, the people would not be so terrified and disheartened. In the night he made...
That was Sunday, the 9th of September, well out to sea beyond the last known island. Ponder that deception, and what it has to say of the Admiral's steadfastness, and of the dangers he foresaw. If the voyage were of long duration, and if the people on the ships should learn how far they were from the known world, how far toward the unknown world terror would take them. That secret was to be the Admiral's alone. He did not fear it.
That day they sailed on their course, which was west, and made 20 leagues or more, but only counted 16. They saw a large piece of the mast of a ship of 120 tons, but were unable to take it. In the night...
That was September 11, Tuesday, the 39th day from Palos Roads. There had been ships before them in that ocean then, and not to return from it.
On this day, at the commencement of the night, the needles turned a half point to the northwest, and in the morning they turned somewhat more northwest. That day and night...
This variation, familiar enough now, had never been observed before. If any proof were needed that the caravels were moving out of the known into the unknown world, the variation of the compass needle was that proof. Even the surest and most certain thing, the central certainty of every sailor's life, was sure no longer.
Here, those of the caravel Nina reported that they had seen a tern and a bosun's bird, and these birds never go more than 25 leagues from the land. That day they navigated...
It was Friday, the 14th of September, almost a month before the land was found, that the Admiral wrote those words at his cabin table at the day's end.
In the early part of the night, there fell from heaven into the sea a marvelous flame of fire at a distance of about 4 or 5 leagues. That day and night...
Saturday, the 15th of September, and already signs and portents.
The weather was like April in Andalusia. Here began to see many tufts of grass, which were very green and appeared to have been quite recently torn from the land. From this they judged that they...
Sunday, September the 16th.
The pilots observed the north point and found that the needles turned a full point to the west of north. So the mariners were alarmed and dejected and did not give their reason. They proceeded on...
But the Admiral knew, or rather the Admiral gave them a reason, and a good reason, though not the true one. The Admiral told them, speaking as Dante might have spoken, that the cause was that the star makes the movement and not the needle. It is true that the pole star describes a circle around the pole of the earth, but not a circle equal to the variation of the needle.
The seawater was found to be less salt than it had been since leaving the Canaries. The breezes were always soft. Everyone was pleased, and the best sailors went ahead to sight the first land. They saw many tunny fish, and the crew of the Nina killed one. These signs of land came from the west, in which direction I trust in that high God, in whose hands are all victories, that very soon we shall sight land. In that morning a white bird was seen, which has not the habit of sleeping on the sea. At dawn on that...
This was the 17th of September, a Monday. The landfall many weeks ahead.
A great cloud appeared in the north, which is a sign of the proximity of land. There was also some drizzling rain without wind, which is a sure sign of land. At dawn, 2 or 3 land birds came singing to the ship, and they disappeared before sunset. Afterwards, a booby
The
came.
18th, the 19th, the 20th.
Shaped a course west-northwest, more or less, her head turning from one to the other point. My people were much excited at the thought that in these seas no wind ever blew in the direction of Spain. Part of the day
They feared, that is, what many men had said and feared before, that there was no return from that ocean.
The sea being smooth and calm, the crew began to murmur, saying that here there was no great sea, and that the wind would never blow, so that they could return to Spain. Afterwards the sea rose very much without wind, which astonished them. Thus the high sea was very necessary for me, such as had not appeared but in the time of the Jews, when they went out of Egypt and murmured against Moses, who delivered...
Murmured against the Admiral, and only a great sea without wind, which astonished them, could stop their tongues. And this was the 23rd of September, with 17 days still before them.
At sunset, Martin Alonso went up on the poop of his ship and with much joy called to the admiral, claiming the reward as he had sighted land. When I heard this positively declared, I say that I gave thanks to the Lord on my knees, while Martin Alonso said the Gloria in Excelsis with his people. My crew did the same. Those of the Nina...
This was Martin Alonso Pinzon, the good navigator, who sailed in the Pinta, which was ahead of the Santa Maria, on which the admiral sailed, and ahead of the Nina also. The sunset was the sunset of the 25th, but there was no land. And the days passed, and the nights also.
The sea smooth as a river. There was much weed. There was a heavy shower of rain. A white bird was also seen that appeared to be a gull. Sandpipers appeared, and much...
Wednesday the 26th, Thursday the 27th, Friday the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, the 1st of October, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and now the 7th.
This day at sunrise, the Caravel Nina, which went ahead, being the best sailor, and pushed forward as much as possible to sight the land first, so as to enjoy the reward which the sovereigns had promised to whoever should see it first, hoisted a flag at the masthead and fired a gun as a signal that she had sighted land. No land was seen during the afternoon.
Twice they had found land, and there was no land, and the needle altered.
And passed a great number of birds flying from north to southwest. This gave rise to the belief that the birds were flying from the winter, which might be supposed to be near in the land from which they came.
To which the admiral adds, most of the islands held by the Portuguese were discovered by the flight of birds. And to whom do you think those words were written in that little cabin looking aft over the wide wake? To whom but to himself?
Throughout the night, birds were heard passing.
Throughout the night of the 8th of October, and of the 9th, in the strange soft wind that was like April in Seville, as the admiral wrote so often in his book, but yet not like it.
Here the people could endure no longer. They complained of the length of the voyage, but the admiral cheered them up in the best way that he could. He added that however much they might complain, he had to go to the Indies, and that he would go on until he found them with the help of God. During the day and night...
So they came to the candle moving on the dock, and to Rodrigo's landfall. It was 2 hours past midnight of Friday, the 12th of October, when Rodrigo de Triana, with the old moon searching beyond him into the shadow to the west, imagined, and then did not imagine, the glimmer of the surf along the beach the Indians called Guanahani, and Columbus called San Salvador, and we call Watling Island. It is not difficult even now to imagine with what emotions they lay there for those few remaining hours of the night, hove to, as the Admiral's journal puts it, waiting for daylight. There would have been the rattle of canvas as the ship came round, the unaccustomed silence as she lost way in the long swells, and under that whispering silence, at first faint, then nearer as the wind moved, the long unending thunder of the surf. There would have been the now strange odor of the land, the blur of moonlight on the shining beaches, the low line of the trees on the faint sky, the men along the deck rails staring at that glimmering shore, and then, as the dawn came, trees, and the land's true shape before them. And so they stood in with the first light. And presently, as the Admiral's journal puts it, they saw naked people. But what people? Of what race or nation they could not tell. And the Admiral went on shore in the armed boat with Martin Alonso Pinzon and Vicente, his brother. And the Admiral took the royal standard. And the two captains had two banners of the green cross with an F and a Y for Fernando and Isabel, and a crown over each letter. And they saw trees, very green after that long journey, and much fresh water, lovely after the stale water in the casks, and many and different kinds of fruits. And the admiral took possession of the said island for the king and for the queen, his lords. And as for the naked people of the island, the admiral wrote these words in his cabin at the day's end of the long hoped-for day.
Aye, that we might form great friendship, for I knew that they were a people who could be more easily freed and converted to our holy faith by love than by force, gave to some of them red caps and glass beads to put around their necks, and many other things of little value, which gave them great pleasure and made them so much our friends that it was a marvel to see. Presently many...
But for caution's sake, or for some other reason, the admiral and his companions pushed off in the ship's boats beyond the surf, and held there with the oars in the bright sun and the sound of the sea, the voices of the Indians calling and laughing to them through the breaking water.
They came to the ship's boats where we were, swimming and bringing us parrots, cotton threads in skeins, darts, and many other things. And we exchanged them for other things that we gave them, such as glass beads and small bells. In fine, they took all and gave what they had with good will. It appeared to me to be a race of people very poor in everything. They go naked as when their mothers bore them, and so do the women, although I did not see more than one young girl.
All I saw were youth, none more than 30 years of age. They are very well made, with very handsome bodies and very good countenances, their eyes very beautiful and not small. Their hair is short and coarse, almost like the hairs of a horse's tail. I saw no beast of any kind except parrots on this island. I believe that they would easily be made.
For 2 days they lay off the shore of that island, puzzling over the look of the land and the people, their minds returning always to the question of Cathay and the Great Khan, whose islands these should be if the admiral's maps were true maps.
I was attentive and took trouble to ascertain if there was gold. I saw some of them had a small piece fastened in a hole they have in the nose. And by signs I was able to make out that to the south, or going from the island to the south, there was a king who had great cupfuls and who possessed a great quantity. I tried to get them to go.
The shape of their dark hands making the cups form in the sunlight by that sea stands in the admiral's narrative after 4 centuries and more, still vivid.
I do not wish to stop in discovering and visiting many islands to find gold. These people make signs that it is worn on the arms and legs, and it must be gold, for they point to some pieces I have. I cannot err with the help of our Lord in finding out where this gold has its origin, being in the middle
And
of
so,
the channel.
with God's help and the gestures of the Indians to guide them, they sailed on with the sound of the sea beneath and the ship's gear straining in the steady wind.
Now, as I am writing this, I make sail with the wind at the south, to sail round the island and to navigate until I find Samayot, which is the island or city where there is gold. So all the natives say, who are on
And
board
yet there were other things than gold among those green and golden islands, and even the admiral saw them, as his journal bears human witness to this day.
Here the fish are so unlike ours that it is wonderful. Some are the shapes of dories and the finest colors in the world. Blue, yellow, red, and other tints, all painted in various ways. And the colors are so bright that there is not a man who would not be astonished and would not take great delight in seeing them. I will write respecting searching. Arriving at this cape, I found the smell of the trees and flowers so delicious that it seemed the pleasantest thing in the world. Tomorrow, before I leave this place, throughout the island all is green. and the herbage like April in Andalusia. The songs of the birds were so pleasant that it seemed as if a man could never wish to leave that place. The flocks of parrots concealed the sun, and the birds were so numerous.
And yet a man must leave even such islands as these, and go on, and search to the westward.
I shall then shape a course for another much larger island, which I believe to be Cipango, judging from the signs made by the Indians I bring with me. They call it Cuba, and they say there are ships and many skillful sailors there. I am still resolved to go to the mainland and the city of Guisai, and to deliver the letter of your highnesses to the Grand Khan, requesting a reply and returning with it.
And so the admiral went on by the windward and the leeward channels, to the island as he thought of Cipango, which would have been Japan. But it was not to Marco Polo's city of Quinsay or to the palace of the great Khan he came, but to a different country. And it was not from the islands of India recently discovered beyond the Ganges that he returned, as he wrote the king's treasurer, but from a greater and a richer land. There was better reason than Columbus ever knew for the noble sentences with which, back in Spain, his letter to their Majesties' treasurer ended.
Therefore, let the king and queen, and our princes, and their most happy kingdoms, and all the other provinces of Christendom render thanks to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who has granted us so great victory and such prosperity. Let processions be made and sacred feasts be held, and the temples be adorned with festive boughs. Let Christ rejoice on earth as he rejoices in heaven, in the prospect of the salvation of the souls of so many nations hitherto lost. Let us also rejoice as well on account of the exaltation of our faith, as on account of the increase of our temporal prosperity, of which not only Spain, but all Christendom will be partakers.
The first chapter of The American Story has just been concluded. Mr. Archibald MacLeish, distinguished American poet, selected from Las Casas' account of the Journal of Christopher Columbus passages in which the great experience of the discovery is put into words which all the peoples of the American continent understand and share. Mr. MacLeish wrote the script which contains these selections and himself delivered the narrative account. The part of the Admiral was played by Edwin Jerome. The entire production was under the direction of Frank Papp. The American Story was brought to you by the NBC Inter-American University of the Air, which offers, for your listening each week as a public service over many of these stations, music of the New World and the historical series Lands of the Free. Next week, The American Story will continue to unfold the story of the discoveries of the Americas.
Special handbooks which give extensive background material for this series have been published by the Columbia University Press and are available for 25 cents to cover the cost of printing and mailing. Those who want the handbooks should write to American Story, Station J, Box 30, New York, New York. This is the National Broadcasting Company.